Before the parade passes by, I'm gonna go and taste Saturday's high life.
I think what happens in a theatre is a miracle. I do. I think it's the closest thing to a miracle in this 21st century.
It's very rare that you see something which is just mesmeric. But when you do, when you can, it is gold dust because you know it's gone. And at the end of the show, it may never be as good as that again for the audience.
There never will be a substitute for live theater because the performers respond to the audience responds to the performers. You can feel it, it's magnetic.
And in television or movies, you're not breathing the same oxygen.
It's not on film. It happens once.
The theater, there's no cheating, there's no redoing it. You have to do it there, on the spot. And there's only one crack a night.
On the stage, the actor is making those creative, artistic choices, which in a movie, the director and the editor are making. In the theatre, the actor's in charge. He makes the decisions. It's his medium.
Nobody can touch you. You're out there. Once that curtain goes up, hey, you know.
We have another ear that never ceases. It's as sensitive as can be. You're working on your fellow actor, but that other ear, that other antenna, hears the audience always.
You can smell them, you can see them, you can almost touch them. And then you never forget.
So that's what you have to tell people, that they will go to see something that they will take away with them forever.
What does the theater have to offer that movies and television don't? The theater, above all else, is live.
Give my regards to Broadway. Remember me to Herald Square. Tell all the gang at 42nd Street that I will soon be there.
I grew up in the mid-1960s in the small town of Beech Grove, Indiana. There wasn't much to do in Beech Grove. It seems like much of my youth was spent in the basement of our suburban tract house, watching old movies on television. I soon realized that most of these Hollywood stars hadn't actually started out in Hollywood. They had started out on Broadway, performing live. I was curious, so after school I would ride my bike to the Beech Grove Public Library on Main Street and study the New York Times. I was stunned at how many shows were playing simultaneously. Carol Channing in Hello, Dolly, Angela Lansbury in Mame. I would pore over our local TV section for movies that had come from Broadway shows. Marlon Brando and Kim Hunter in Streetcar Named Desire. Robert Morris and Michelle Lee in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying. Julie Harris and Ethel Waters in Member of the Wedding. And Gwen Verdon in Damn Yankees. Carol Burnett had started out on Broadway too, and always had stage people on her TV show, like Robert Goulet, Lainie Kazan, or Kay Ballard. By the time I did move to New York City in the early 1980s, I found that the Broadway that I had dreamt of starring on no longer existed. There were no more John Raitt romantic baritones. He had been replaced with high rock tenors dying in French Revolution musicals, or singers and dancers covered in cat costumes appearing in British imports. It was a different world. But as I walked through Times Square over the next 2 decades, I couldn't help but wonder, had this golden age of Broadway ever really existed? Had I been just a little too late? Or had it perhaps only been something that I had watched in those old movies in Beech Grove, Indiana? I decided to find out for myself. I set off alone with my camera, no budget, no crew, to find an old Broadway legend or two to sit at their knee and ask them what it had really been like to have been there. Had there really been a golden age? And what had happened to it? I may have been a little bit too late to talk to Ethel Merman or Mary Martin, and the only Barrymore left was Drew. But little did I know, my journey would take me over 5 years and bring me to 4 countries, 100 legends, and back in time to another world.
We didn't call it the Golden Age, of course. But now I look back, I do believe it was.
When you say golden era, I'm not even aware that it was a golden era until you say it. And then I say, yes, it was a golden era and there was a camaraderie.
No one ever thought it would come to an end. It was just assumed that every year there'd be a Rodgers and Hammerstein, a Lerner and Loewe, a Frank Lesser, a Julie Stein musical.
I thought it was going to go on forever. You hoped, that it would.
The culture has changed so much from what it used to be. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it is different.
It was such a thrilling and exciting and dangerous and wonderful time.
Those were the days of Kim Stanley and Julie Harris. Julie Harris had a new play every season. I saw everything she did.
When the great stars of the theater, like the Lunts and Catherine Cornell and Katharine Hepburn and Laurence Olivier, when they had a success in New York, it was thrilling.
It was a glorious, wonderful time to come down from the sky and How to Succeed. Come down from the window washer and turn around to the audience. How to succeed in business. And look out in the audience and celebrities and political people.
They hadn't torn down the Morosco, my first theater where I did Remains to be Seen. It was the theater district.
Walking to the theater to do my performance of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. And next door is Bill Inger's Bus Stop. And over there is Tea and Sympathy. And over there is Brigadoon. And over there is Eugene O'Neill. Unbelievable.
It was a dream come true.
I remember seeing the New York Times theater section in 1950. And if you look at that theater page, you'd say all of these shows couldn't have been running at the same time. Not South Pacific and Mr. Roberts and A Streetcar Named Desire and Death of a Salesman. They couldn't be all on Broadway at the same time in the same year. Yeah, they were.
You took it for granted. That it's only in retrospect that you look back and say, wow, was that amazing?
We don't know that when we're doing it. That is the end of something. It takes a few years to realize that something has ended.
I didn't realize it. I just thought that that's the way it always was. I didn't realize that those years were the golden age of Broadway, and it'll never be the same again, ever.
My mother took me to plays, and she'd always get the front row. And I remember it, for some reason, this one particular play, the first one, the leading lady had this incredible perfume that really came across the stage to me. And there was just something about that. And to this day, when I'm on the stage, I think I wear a little more perfume than I ought to. So I hope I get somebody from that audience, some young person who says, ooh, there's something about this.
I saw Orson Welles Around the World in 80 Days and remember him shooting the bird out of the center of the chandelier in the house and all the feathers falling down. And that was my first theater experience. I caught a feather and got home with, I took this home with me.
I saw James Earl Jones do The Great White Hope. Somewhere in the show, he swung his head around and a bead of sweat came flying out into the audience and hit me. And I was one with James Earl Jones from that moment on.
Yeah, the first show I saw was Oklahoma, but the one I particularly remember is Carousel because Oscar took me to New Haven and I saw the first performance of Carousel, and that was one of the great evenings of my life.
And it was in previews?
It was the very first performance ever.
Oh, wow.
In New Haven.
What was it like?
It was thrilling. It was just thrilling. I cried. It was thrilling.
My mother took me to my first Broadway show, which was Gypsy. And I'll never forget the feeling that I had when the overture started. Because, see, I can get emotional right now. There's something that brings me immediately back to that time when I sat in a real theater, when I was in New York.
Do you remember those first four notes of that overture off the top of your head?
Da, 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 da. Was that it?
That's it.
Yeah.
The first show I saw was Annie, Get Your Gun with Ethel Merman, and I just went berserk, you know. I really went mad, and I said, I want to be up there. And then I left
Hollywood. I bought out my contract because I wanted to get to New York. And I was a young movie star, broke, literally, because I decided that I wanted to be in the theater.
The first thing that I did was an acting role, and it was with Ethel Waters on a show that she had called Beulah. I played her niece on an episode. And she invited my mother and I was 6 years old, to see Member of the Wedding. 6 years old, going to the straight play, that's quite something when your mother doesn't have to say, shh, sit still. She didn't have to do that for me. I was just like riveted.
The first play I ever saw was Member of the Wedding, Julie Harris and Ethel Waters. Boy, oh boy.
I was a teenager, I guess, when I saw Ethel Waters in Mamba's Daughters. She was a woman who worked in cotton fields and had a baby and had given the baby away. And the baby was almost white because the man was fair-skinned and who raped her. And the baby was taken away. And then the girl grows up and they have the confrontation scene. And Ethel was in the field hand's dress, the cotton handkerchief over her head, and this girl, slender and beautiful, was standing watching her. And they said, this is your mother. And Ethel's arms went out, like that, and the girl didn't know what to do. But those arms stayed out there until the child couldn't resist and ran to her mother. I was 14, maybe. I never forget that feeling. It was just so powerful.
And little did you know you'd be running into those same arms.
I know.
Every night for a year and a half.
Yes.
China, Iceland, South America, traveling on trains, riding rip on motorcycles, flying all over the world in airplanes. We will have thousands and thousands of friends. We belong to so many clubs and we can't even keep track of them all. We will be members of the whole world. Firemen!
If you see Julie Harris, a Member of the Wedding, or Shirley Booth in Come Back, Little Sheba, or Laurence Olivier in The Entertainer, or Hume and Jessica in The Four Poster, see, it stays with you forever. Julie Harris yelling at the morphs in Member of the Wedding. You've got wings. What are you doing here? You've got wings! What are you doing here? You want to talk about it? You know what I mean? It's better than the Roseanne show. I'm going to get letters.
As each of these legends told me of the performances that had inspired them to move to this town, I thought of the day that I had first come here myself from Indiana, stepping off a bus into the middle of a ravaged 1980s Times Square. I couldn't help but wonder what it must have been like for them, arriving in a completely different New York City.
Do you remember the first time that you saw Times Square?
I don't know. I think it was in 1732, but I could be wrong. Are you rolling?
Yeah.
Oh, you are?
I certainly do remember when I first arrived in New York because it was 1940, and New York was just the way I had seen it in all those black and white movies as a kid.
I had seen Times Square only in the movies, and for the most part, it was black and white when I was growing up.
And it was just wonderful. I mean, it was just everything I had dreamed that it would be.
First time I saw Times Square in a Jim Cagney film.
King Kong and the Empire State Building, really?
The sidewalks in New York at night, very late at night, was perfectly safe. It used to be. But this was Depression time when I was on the stage.
I came here in 1948. That was the first time I'd really been away from home. And I had trouble sleeping because I was always so excited. So I'd get up at, 7 o'clock in the morning and just walk around, and I just kept pinching myself. I couldn't believe I was in New York.
The first time I saw Times Square was in 1947 when I appeared at the Strand Theater doing 6 shows a day with Spike Jones and his orchestra.
And the Strand was in Times Square.
And I'll never forget, as long as I live, seeing my first Times Square. It was just astounding. The streets coming from all over, every place, and the lights.
I knew that I wanted to do Broadway. I left Spike Jones in New York City. I quit the band in New York City because I said, I've got to do Broadway.
I came out of the theater that night. When I went in, it was daylight because I went in to rehearse. Came out that night and saw Times Square. I think you fall in love with places.
Times Square was pretty happy. You know, people walking around the streets and everything, but with smiles on their faces, you know.
And that fascinated me, to see this in lights. And I could understand why they call it the Great White Way. And that was a great impression on me.
I used to love it when there was somebody puffing smoke. They're very imaginative.
Well, there was a magazine, Theater Arts Monthly, and I memorized every word of it. I mean, I knew New York before I ever got here.
Oh, so you just
There
made
was
sure
nothing-
everything was where it was supposed to be.
Exactly. I made sure everything was where it was supposed to be. That's exactly it.
I was 13 or 14 when I saved my money and just got on the bus from Journal Square in Newark, New Jersey. Got off at Times Square area and walked up and down the 40s looking at the marquees and stopped about 50th Street because I thought that was New York and went home. It was my secret. I'm sure other boys were sneaking to other things when they were that age, but I was sneaking off to Broadway.
When I first came to New York, it was in the middle of that blizzard. I think that was 1947. No subways, which I didn't know how to take anyway. No buses, no taxi cabs were running. But through the snow, there were all these marquees with names that I'd only heard of.
I mean, I was so green that when the stewardess said, we're going to be landing in Newark, and I thought, oh my God, because I had a real, not just Southern, but a real Cajun Louisiana accent, you know. And I remember I said, ooh, I want to go to New York, not Newark. I mean, that's how green I was.
I used to stand there and just look. I mean, I'd be so still looking that the pigeons would land on me, just like they'd land on the statue in Times Square.
I was in the George White scandals, and Mr. White showed me the big sign in Times Square that lit up, and it had George White scandals, and it showed me dancing, all in lights. And I remember how thrilled I was to see that, and I was 16 years old when I saw it.
My dream started when I was a kid on the corner of a neighborhood of tenements on 29th Street between 1st and 2nd Avenue. I stayed out of school for 36 days in a row. I went to every movie on Broadway, Radio City Music Hall, the Roxy. I saw stage shows. I felt it was all being done for me, you know. I said, this is my way off the corner. I think I found it.
I got on a plane. I'd never been any further east than Texas. And I landed, and I was so naive and stupid that I had no idea where I was going to stay. I was reading the New Yorker on the airplane, and I saw a little ad for the Algonquin Hotel. I thought, oh, that's nice. That's where the round table was. So I had a cardboard suitcase, and they gave me a room for $9 a day. And $9 a day was enormous because when I'd left home, our rent was $30 a month, so I was $1 a day. So I called my grandmother and my mother collect, and they kept saying, come home, come home. I hung up. I didn't know what I was going to do. I unpacked my suitcase, and I started to cry.
One thing I was determined, though, I was determined that I was not going home. I never held out the idea, well, if this doesn't work, you can always go home. Never.
I was out here in California, a young singer, and aspiring to make it. Theater Guild came out looking for a replacement of Alfred Drake, offering to pay my way to New York and back. They didn't like me, so I decided this would be my big break and sold the car, gave up the apartment, took a 4.5-day train ride to New York, was whisked right from the Penn Station and taken to the St. James Theater and told to sing. Well, I was very cocky in those days, as you should be, you know. And I said, look, I've warmed up since I left California. You don't mind if I warm up singing this Figaro? But I guess it inspired them, Rodgers and Hammerstein, because the fast patter part in the Figaro aria. My name is Figaro, Figaro, Figaro.
That prompted their writing the soliloquy from Carousel for me.
It goes, I don't give a damn what he does, as long as he does what he likes. He can sit on his tail or work on a rail with a hammer. Had the same kind of pattern going for it, and it had the big high tessitura at the end.
My little girl. My little girl. I gotta get ready before she comes. I gotta make certain that she won't be dragged up in slums with a lot of bums like me. She's gotta be sheltered and fed and dressed in the best that money can buy. I never knew how to get money, but I'll try. By God, I'll try. I'll go out and make it or steal it or take it or
Maggie Garland lives in a cold water tenement in the East 70s, which she rents for $22 a month and has furnished from second-hand stores. She is deadly serious about her career and has been since she played the lead in her high school class playback in Oklahoma City. Like most young actresses, Maggie keeps a close check on living expenses, which she shares with her roommate.
My parents said, now here's $250, that's all we've got. And you can use it and stay in New York as long as it lasts. By the way, in New York in those days was quite different. Every subway, bus, and train was a nickel. Every hamburger was a dime. Huge, huge, gorgeous hamburgers. I can still see them better than they are now.
In the Automat, there was a restaurant. For a nickel, you could go in and get a cup of coffee, and you open up a slot, and out comes a muffin. But you could have a coffee and a roll for 10 cents.
You could go to the Automat and you could get lemon in a glass, sugar on the table already, and then free water. I would make my lemonade because I never had any money.
I went to New York, I think it was 55, with another actor, and we had no money. We were flat broke. We were going into a Horn and Hardart. I said, we've got to get some cutlery. I said, no, just do it my way. I jack it on. I said, you take the 2 forks, 2 big spoons, 2 little spoons, and we ate with some of them and put the others up the sleeve like that, and then put your hand in your pocket and drop it into the pocket.
I had one phone number in my wallet, and it was that of a girl that had been ahead of me at UCLA, and I called her, and I hear all these noises, girls in the background, and she said, where are you? I said, I'm at the Algonquin. She said, what? You're doing? Get out of there. She said, we're at the rehearsal club. You know, that's the place Stage Door was written about. She said, you get over here. I'll get you a cot here. So I packed up my cardboard suitcase and walked up to the rehearsal club.
4 other girls that I'd gone to Northwestern with put me up for a week, and then I stayed with somebody else for a week. And oh, Broadway, that's what I wanted.
My first apartment when I got to Broadway was a place called the Whitby. I think it was on 45th Street. Lenny Kazan lived down the hall. It was, you open the drapes, boom, there's the kitchen. You just walked in it. You had about maybe 8-9 inches.
On the 1st and the 15th of the month, I made $40. I know it's hard to believe, $40. And my rent was $30 a month.
I was the hick. There was the ballerina. There was the English kind of twit. There was the actor studio girl who never bathed and slept under newspapers. And then there was the smart ass. And she was the one that chewed gum and knew everything, you know. And me.
And this is one room.
And this is all in one room.
We lived with 2 other would-be actresses. And it was one room with a covered kitchen. And they went to bed on the studio couch, which let out. And my mother and I were in the Inador Murphy bed.
I lived at the Henry Hudson Hotel, the American Women's Club, it was called. And where
no men were allowed into the elevator, certainly not in your room. It was June Allison, who became a famous movie star, and the four of us lived there with the one bathroom. No, I mean, you didn't think of it as a hardship living in one room. It was what you did.
I lived most of those times on Sullivan Street, 147 Sullivan Street, which was in the Italian section, which I still see the people today. And they fed me for years. I did 22 off-Broadway shows, and I would come home at night with no money, and there was always food outside my door. Ziti and sausage from like 1954 to 65. That's about 9 years of ziti and sausage.
An actor living on ziti and sausage for a decade. Maybe it wasn't easier back then, but it was different. A struggling actor couldn't isolate himself with headphones, a Walkman, a cell phone, the internet, or 1,000 cable channels on demand. 4 girls living together in one room didn't even have a television. So what did they do? They struggled. Together.
I hear Garson Kanan starts casting Friday. Garson Kanan? Friday at 10.
The theater was a community then. There were a whole large group of people. Everybody loved the theater and talked theater.
I couldn't afford to have dinner there, but I went to Sardi's and at the bar, partaking of all the free cheese and Ritz crackers. Everyone was talking about the plays they had seen that night, and everybody was really just fired up with a fever of theater.
It was wonderful. Alfred was so funny because we were so poor then, we couldn't afford Sardi's, so we used to go to Child's and sit all night and discuss theater, you know.
And early on, there was a little place called Ralph's on West 45th Street, where you went when you didn't have much money. That's where you went to Ralph's.
I would go where the actors were, you know. There was a drugstore and all the actors were there.
They'd all come to the drugstore and everybody'd have a tuna fish sandwich.
And you'd go in and you'd find out what shows are coming up, and there was a sense of community.
Well, I remember Gray's Drugstore across from the old Actors Studio.
It's where I met Rod Steiger. It's where I met Jimmy Dean. Jack Lemmon would hang out there. I remember Jack Warden. Gray's Drugstore, where you'd get the gossip and the news, and this was vital. It was vitally important to be in those places.
And you went to Walgreens Drugstore?
Walgreens Drugstore.
Walgreens Drugstore.
Walgreens.
Walgreens.
Walgreens was a Walgreens drugstore in the Astor Hotel where we used to all meet, and sometimes we couldn't afford to pay our bill, and they would carry us for a while until we got a job.
Steve and I had an important lunch sitting at the counter at Walgreens, and I remember us talking about the future of the theater and how we'd be part of it before we were part of it.
I didn't hang out with the gang. I never went through that drugstore period. I went to saloons like a crazy person because, boy, that was fun.
All the comedians hung out at Hanson's Drugstore at like 50th and 7th Avenue, where my pal Tom Poston took me there. And I'd sit at that table with those comics, Jackie Leonard and Lenny Bruce, and they would go bang, bang, boom, and they never laughed. I was the only one laughing. You know, I was 20. They'd say, funny.
I think Leo's show had a newspaper, and they would send kids for auditions for things.
I would look in the paper. There was a column called News of the Rialto, and it would say what plays were coming into New York. If you got it in early September, it could list the season, what was promised and hoped for, it used to say.
Years ago, you went door to door between the producers and the agent's office, and you made yourself known to them on a one-to-one basis.
I was 18 at the time, and so I went to the William Morris office, and I was sitting next to, by the way, Comden and Green were on my right, and they weren't Comden and Green yet.
We were making the rounds of the offices, because that's what you did in those days.
I was just an unemployed soul.
We had to write to give ourselves material to perform, because we couldn't afford to buy material. So we just, as we say, we chipped in and bought a pencil and started to write.
And that's where we, down on our luck, actors would meet. And one of them was Jimmy Dean. And Jimmy and I became friends, and Jimmy and I started making the rounds together, keep each other company for the rejections, which were often.
Usually didn't get very nice treatment from the secretaries.
I said, I'd like to see Alfred Ludlum von Tampley. Do you have an appointment? I said,
no casting.
Why are you so mean to everybody? She said, I'm not. I said, yes, you are. You bark.
They brush you off and say, yes, well, Mr. So-and-so is busy right now.
It was so discouraging. I would go into office after office after office, and it's not an ego builder, that process.
I don't think you even left picture and resume in those days, but you left your name and hopefully got an appointment.
Then in the evening, you had a bite, fell flat into bed, and started again early the next morning.
I mean, the idea of doing that now is ludicrous. I passed a pile of 8x10s, you call them, and with resumes on the back at the theater where I'm working now. It was about this thick, and on top of it, it said shred. Wow.
4 of us bought a dress. Each one of us put in $5. So it was a $20 dress at Bloomingdale's, which was expensive. Then if you had an audition and you got first claim to it, you got to wear the dress. But then you were responsible for having it cleaned and put back in the closet for the next person.
I just know that I loved walking down 46th Street and stagehands and dancers hanging outside and it was, the streets were packed with our people.
I remember 46th Street at the Howard Johnsons. We'd all meet at the Howard Johnsons. You know, we'd get our number, you know, number 156 or number 283 would be your audition number, you know. And then we'd go get coffee or a grilled cheese sandwich.
You could sit out in Schubert Alley in the sun before a matinee. People would walk by. It was a happy time.
And you knew everybody's name, even in the other theaters.
Back then, there weren't so many of us. We knew everybody who was in show business of any kind. We knew the jazz musicians, we knew the strippers.
It's almost a big family, you might say. Everybody outside of the theater is a civilian.
We didn't have that in Hollywood. It didn't stem from jealousy. It's just stemmed from the way Hollywood is laid out.
I mean, out here, you don't see anybody. Nanette Fabre and I have been trying to have lunch together, I think, for a year.
When all these legends were struggling together in New York City, they all seemed to have seen one performance that affected them for the rest of their lives. I would have expected it to be Ethel Merman, Mary Martin, or one of the usual suspects, but instead it was always the same person, a little old lady named Laurette Taylor that I had never heard of. She had never been in movies or television, except for a few silent films in the 20s. But nevertheless, she directly influenced almost every person in this film. How did that happen?
She was mesmerizing. She's the most powerful actress I've ever seen.
I saw her 5 times in Glass Menagerie and 10 times in Outward Bound.
And was she?
She was unforgettable. I still, to this moment, moments that I won't forget ever, ever, ever. If I shut my eyes, it's as though I'd just seen it this second. In Outward Bound, she turned around and she saw her son, and she said, "Oh!" And there he was, and I tell you, I'll never forget as long as I live. I sobbed out loud.
The first play I saw was Laurette Taylor in the Glass Menagerie. And I thought, she's not so good. She's just like everybody you see on the street. I didn't realize it took a lifetime to get to be that good.
Laurette Taylor on stage, I thought they pulled her off the street. She was so natural.
Laurette Taylor was almost like this woman had found a way into the theater through the stage door and was sort of wandering around the kitchen.
That was the greatest performance I've ever seen in all my life. It was fantastic. I've never seen anything to top that in my life.
Laurette Taylor. I knew when I watched it and I sat in the balcony, you'll never see greater acting as long as you live.
I saw the Glass Menagerie before it opened. I mean, I'd heard about the reviews in Chicago. You couldn't not have heard.
Oh, yes, Laurette Taylor. I saw that twice.
And then I saw it 3 more times. I had to see her. I just had to see her again.
I saw that 7 times.
7 times. And Lorette Taylor turned around and pulled down her girdle. And I have never been that affected by a stage action in my whole life. It made me weep.
I saw Lorette in Glass Menagerie. Oh boy. She was it. Whenever I see somebody do something like that, I walk for miles afterwards. I can't get it out of my head. Did a lot of walking.
When she did the speech about the Jonkles and the gentleman caller, she was a young girl. It was this old lady, but she was a young girl. She was anything she wanted to be.
And everybody talks about her telephone conversation to that woman who she's trying to sell magazines to. It's just the saddest, most brilliant. That's how I learned. I learned with these people.
How can somebody be that real? Could have been my mother. You know? How can a woman laugh and cry in the same breath? Only people do that. I never saw an actress do that.
It's hard. I can't describe what she did or how she did it, but boy.
Well, I especially treasure having seen her on stage, Laura Taylor, because she never made a film with sound.
And they did a screen test with her.
I'm 80 today.
Congratulations. Many happy returns.
Thanks. Because my old friends are dead. I can't do anything for them now. So I thought I'd take this jaunt abroad. And I've seen many lovely things. But I had to see them alone.
And she was so natural, they didn't believe that she was an actress. And they never used her.
Somebody said yes. Rossetti said, beauty without the beloved is like a sword through the heart.
And I used to have my supper after the show at Longchamps, which is long gone. But she used to sit at a table right over there, and she would line up 3 drinks. And she sat alone and sipped those 3 drinks, and then she went home or wherever she went.
I was Julie Hayden's understudy for the Glass Menagerie. So I saw it a great many times.
From the wings?
Yeah, yes. Now, this may be related to the fact that she drank. She never seemed drunk to me. I never saw her drink, but I think I saw it twice, where in the middle of a scene she'd come into the wings beckoning, and they'd bring a basin or something. And she threw up and went back on stage continuing the scene. And I don't think the audience knew it. You know, it was as if she drifted to that side of the room and was gone for a second and was there. You know, it was miraculous. It was a miracle.
The play that I knew had to be preserved was Lorette Taylor in the Glass Menagerie, and she was very old at that time. And I said, we must preserve this. Never happened.
You were right. There's no record of it.
Yeah, and nobody knows who she is.
She changed acting. Her impact, whether people saw her or not, they read about her, etc. And I think we've all been striving to be her one way or another.
I'll tell you what, I got one in the standing room for $4.80.
$4.80 for standing room? Mm-hmm. Boy, it's a lot to stand for, ain't it? You couldn't make that $2.40 now stand on 1 foot.
Okay, Indiana, you win. Here's one on the balcony, $2.40. I don't know why I should be doing this. I guess there's something about you guys from Indiana.
We didn't have an ironing board for 2 years, and ironing boards were about $3.95, and theater tickets were $1.10 a piece. And my mother would say, should we get an ironing board or should we go to the theater? And I'd say, let's go to the theater. So I used to iron on the floor with, doing stretches with my legs out like this.
When I was a kid, and you'd go to a place called Gray's Drugstore. It
was actually underneath Gray's drugstore.
It was the basement at 42nd Street. And you could buy last-minute sales of tickets. And the second balcony, we could get tickets for 55 cents. They were normally $1.10.
It was absolutely wonderful. For 25 cents, you could stand in the back of any theater. I saw everything. You could go to the Metropolitan Opera for 25 cents and be up at the top.
Going to the theater was so easy. If you could go to the theater for $1,
$1.80,
$3.50.
$3.75, $3.98, $4.40, $5.80,
$6.60,
$7.50,
$8.80. Then it skyrocketed to $11 for New Year's Eve.
In 1968, we went to the unheard of price of $15 a ticket. That was outrageous.
I once said to Nancy Walker, who was a dear friend of mine, I said, Nancy, do you think I have anything to bring musicals? She said, yes, $6.95. That's the top price.
But a smart kid in those days who wanted to see everything, you would just kind of walk in after the first act, find an empty seat, and sit.
We saw a lot of plays, the second and third act.
That's called second acting. You never heard of that?
When you second act, it means the first act curtain comes down, all the people run out of the theater.
You would get an old program from another show, dress up, and hang by the door. And when the ushers came out and bent over, you sort of went over and got in the crowd coming out.
You know, pretend that you came out of the first act. Usually did it with a friend of mine, you know, and we'd say, well, what do you think of it? I'd say, well, I don't know. I don't think she's so good, but I like the set.
Then when everybody went back in such a clutch, you would just walk in with them.
And sat in the back on a Monday or Tuesday. You couldn't do it on a Friday or Saturday.
Acting students, everybody learns to do this. Everybody, come on.
I don't ever remember really going up to a box office and plunking down the money.
And nobody ever had any money in those days, so, you know.
If you managed to get a date, you'd go to see the first act also. And then if you didn't care for it, you could leave and go to another theater for the second act.
And the longest wait in my whole life in theater is that moment, waiting for the lights to go down, and for me to sit in the dark to watch the second act. Because often an usher would come down and say, I know this seat was empty before, and you're in it. Out.
I always thought that when I moved to New York City, it would be like one of those old movies I'd watched in Beech Grove, Indiana. You know, where the leading man or the leading lady got sick and the chorus kid went on for him and became an overnight sensation. Well, in real life, it didn't always happen like that. But then again, sometimes it did.
Shirley was in the chorus. She was in the pajama factory, you know, and so she sang and danced, but just in the chorus.
When she joined the show originally, she had long red hair. And somewhere in Boston, I said, something weird's happening, Mr. Abbott. I keep looking at Carol, and I'm looking at the wrong girl. One of our girls looks just like her. And he said, what are you saying? Oh, my God, yeah. And so there was Carol, and there was a girl with the same hairdo, singing and dancing behind her. And it was Shirley. She had gone and cut her hair. So she became the understudy.
Carol was a gypsy, and I knew that she would go on with a broken neck, like we all would if we're gypsies. So I decided that I wanted to leave Pajama Game and go up the street to the Schubert Theater where Can-Can was playing, where Gwen Verdon sometimes was out. I had my notice in my pocket, ready to go to the theater, turn it in. The subway got stuck in Times Square, so I was 20 minutes late for my own half-hour call. But, you know, how much time do you need to get ready for? It's racing with the clock. When you're racing with the clock, the little part in the chorus. And I got to the theater 10 minutes before the curtain was supposed to go up, and there was Fosse, Jerry Robbins, Hal Prince, and all of them lined up across the stage door saying, where have you been? And I said, I'm sorry. I got reaching the back for my notice. And I said, but the subway got stuck. I'm so sorry. And they said, you're on.
Carol Haney fell and hurt her knee very, very badly.
I stuffed my notice back in real quick. And, you know, I didn't know what key I sang in. I'd never had a rehearsal. I didn't know anything except watching in the wings. Johnny Raitt said to me, what key do you sing Hernando's Hideaway in? And I had no idea.
She was so scared. You didn't know her lines. She could do dances pretty well. That's okay.
I had never opened my mouth on the stage before. I had 2 lines in Me and Juliet. It's so long since Susie left the show, was my line. So that was my big acting experience in Me and Juliet.
We never thought very much about Shirley. You know, we knew her, say hello, she was cute, she was in the chorus.
I had been to Jones Beach the day before and had some tennis shoes in my dancers backed off. Who is this person? But in the end, I guess I did pretty well because they stood up. They gave me this standing ovation. I felt like throwing the tomatoes back at them.
And sitting in the audience is Hal Wallace. And from there on is history.
I didn't know who Hal B. Wallace was, and he asked me to go to dinner. And I thought, great, I can eat meat for the first time in, you know, since I'm 6, because I never had any money to eat meat. I was living on graham crackers and peanut butter.
Bobby Griffith said, I have to talk to that girl. And Bobby said, I hear you're thinking of leaving. Well, I've been offered these 2 movies. He said, don't do it. Your career is on a wonderful course. Made the newspapers, people know you're great. Be a star on Broadway. Don't go out there. They'll make mincemeat of you and send you back, and you will have missed the moment. And she went. And she was right.
In the days when professional producers produced shows, and that's not the case today, they understood that a play was a work in progress until it got to a certain state of maturity. And the way to do it was first you took the play out of town and you honed the play in front of audiences 8 times a week until finally the producer felt this is ready for Broadway.
The audiences in Boston and Philly and New Haven, they had to tell us what was good and what wasn't. That was the last piece of the puzzle.
Morse would take the newspaper in August and he would go through it and say, we'll be there and there and there and there. Because these were plays that friends were opening in, and he knew that we'd be out of town to help out and advise. And they ate and they talked and they told people how to fix the show, and they smoked. And when a show was in trouble, the ashtrays were full of cigarette butts, and the poor author looked disheveled and miserable.
The quality of it occasionally has been presented in films, in many, many musical films. At least they've attempted to present it. And it always comes out like, oh, all these kids having fun together, and gosh, isn't it great? And actually, it's working, making minor changes, which keep us up till 7 every morning.
I liked it because you had a good time. Because it was very chummy, as I said, where you hung out with people, and you had nothing to think about except the show. Except they kept cutting my part and trimming it down because Carol Lawrence was getting very upset because Orson Bean and our parts were working like gangbusters and stopping the show and everything. So they kept cutting it down, then they kept putting it back. It was a nightmare.
You would revise lines, songs, put new songs in, take songs out.
That's why they say the best songs were written out of town in all of these shows.
The songs that I've written out of town have been good, like something like I'm Still Here, and it certainly happened with Comedy Tonight, the opening of Forum, which changed the whole tenor of the show.
Before the Parade Passes By was written under unbelievable pressure in a Detroit hotel room in the middle of a blizzard. And I don't know if I would have written it with as much passion if I didn't have David Merrick breathing down my neck and threatening me.
But then we had to add things. We added So Long Dearie and took out a lot. Mr. Merrick was closing the show. It got such bad reviews.
Hello, Dolly could not have been a bigger bomb. And then Mr. Champion fixed it in Washington, but really fixed it.
And we had an out-of-town tryout with Seesaw, which was also a disaster.
I'm in my cold Detroit hotel room, like 7 o'clock in the morning, and it's my manager, and he says, Lainey, they're replacing you. And who are they replacing you with? One of my best friends, Michelle Lee.
For reasons that had nothing to do with her talent. She's brilliantly talented, as we know. But anyway, they brought Michael Bennett and I in.
And Michelle Lee would be in my costumes, dancing and singing during the day.
When Tommy and I came into the show, we had 2.5 weeks to learn the show before we opened.
And I would sing and dance every night and pour my heart out and cry my eyes out on the stage as this character.
And things went crazy. I mean, we were rehearsing during the day, throwing things out.
And believe it or not, I thought they'll discover that they've made a terrible mistake.
If Hitler were alive, they say, the only appropriate sentence for him would be to be out of town with a musical.
Neil Simon wrote Barefoot in the Park for me. Talk about lucky. Hey, I mean, we were out of town in New Haven, and we were out of town in Boston, and out of, so you're months out of town working on it, rewriting, working, rewriting. The first night that we did it, like in front of an audience, and this was a light comedy, right? It ran something like 5.5 hours.
They changed the whole cast of Clear Day. First preview in Boston went up at 8:30 and came down at 12:10.
So then we start cutting, and I remember Mike Nichols said, save every page you're going to be tearing out, because basically we're going to be tearing out about $10 million worth of jokes.
Cole Porter wrote the first act of Kiss Me Kate on the train from New York to Boston, and then while they were rehearsing it, wrote the second act. All the horror stories are all true.
I was terribly nervous opening night in Philadelphia because everyone was saying, oh no. And I walk out, and after the first chorus, stopped the show. And it absolutely stunned me. I couldn't believe it. And it wasn't until opening night in Philadelphia, and we heard the audience, that we realized we had this fabulous show. I mean, everyone says, oh, wasn't the New York opening fantastic? Yes, it was. But the Philadelphia opening was more so because we really didn't know.
How to Succeed went into Philadelphia with no advance, and we had very few people in the audience on opening night. Robert Morse and Rudy Valley, we were frightened. We were scared.
It was a dismally rainy evening, but the rain did nothing to take the luster off an opening night on Broadway. Among the audience was actress Kitty Carlisle and her husband, playwright Moss Hart. And most important to our story, drama critic Walter Kerr of the New York Herald Tribune. With his fellow critics, Kerr will pass on the worth of the musical. And so, on with the show.
Not a sincere line is spoken in the new Abe Burrows' Frank Lesser musical. And what a relief that is. It is now clear to me that what has been killing musical comedy is sincerity. How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying is crafty, conniving, sneaky, cynical,
irreverent, impertinent, sly, malicious, and lovely. Oh, gosh, thank you, Walter. Just lovely. Oh.
Once upon a time, there was an understudy. This very talented young lady waited and waited and waited in the wings during Guys and Dolls and during the entire run of Ray Bolger's big hit, Where's Charlie? The dramatic critics discovered her talent on the opening night of Cole Porter's Silk Stockings.
The producers came to me and said, we have a new show we'd love you to do. It's called Silk Stockings, and it's Cole Porter, and we'd love you to be in the chorus and understudy the singing and dancing star. And I didn't want to be another understudy. And I said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm sorry. I think I'll go out to Hollywood and try to be a movie star. It's about 2 months later, and I have not become a movie star. Phone rings. Ernie Martin, Fear and Martin. We've opened in Philadelphia. It's a huge hit, but guess what? Ivana Dare is sick. Her understudy went on. It would have been you. So now I'm going to make you an offer. What is that? Will you join us as understudy to the understudy? We'll pay you a lot of money. $150. Big money. $150. I will never forget standing in the back of the Schubert Theater in Philadelphia watching Silk Stockings try out with a girl named Sherry O'Neill, who'd gone on for Ivana Dare. It would have been me. It was she. But I just knew that I had to get that part. But they wouldn't give me a chance at it. They never even rehearsed me. Meanwhile, I'm standing in the wings every night. I swear to you, I even sneaked in and tried on the costumes. Was I aggressive or not? Ambitious little girl. Meanwhile, Ivana Dare is coming back. She's gonna be okay. So the understudy is furious because she also had wanted to be able to open on Broadway in 2 weeks. I'm feeling better. At least they didn't give it to anybody else. Fade out, fade in. 10 days before the show comes to New York. True story. I'm standing in the wings watching, and she comes off stage and collapses. I go running quickly to my dressing room because when I had come in the theater earlier that night, Sherry O'Neill said to the doorman, "Miss Adair is in. Don't tell anybody. I'm catching a train for New York. I have a big audition in the morning for another job. I'm not staying here." So I knew she was on a train for New York. So I went in my chorus girl dressing room, and I'm sitting there, and I'm getting made up, and over the loudspeaker, Sherry O'Neill, please come to the stage manager, Sherry O'Neill. And I know that she is on a train for New York. So it happened, Rick. Knock on the door. Gretchen Weiler. So that was the night. Cole Porter was in the audience. Abe Burrows was in the audience. The producers was in. I went on stage that night. It's called Ambition. The story ends by Cole Porter being carried up to my dressing room, because it was on the second floor, and Abe and the producers saying, "You will open the show in 10 days on Broadway." And I did.
She was a real trooper, and she went on and she became a smash. Jesus, they loved her. And you know, that was the one part that wasn't working all the time.
It had happened the year after Shirley MacLaine went on for Carol Haney, and I don't think an understudy ever, for years and years following that, were ever not ready to have been able to go on a moment's notice. And if they are, they shouldn't be in show business, because that's the kind of discipline you have to have. Can you imagine when Sherry O'Neill came back the next day from New York and was told what happened?
Hope she got the job she auditioned for.
She certainly didn't understudy me.
From June to October, the summer theaters today replace the old-time stock companies as a training ground for ambitious, talented youngsters.
Years ago, theaters during the summer were empty around the country. But they found that if they got a big Broadway star like Lorette Taylor would go out and do Peg of My Heart, a big Broadway hit, pick up some extra cash in the heat of the summer, and fill that theater.
My first season of Summer Stock, for instance, we did, I believe, 10 major musicals in 12 weeks. Now you think about that. You learned your craft pretty good. I had 12 shows under my belt by the time I did my first Summer Stock.
And they all toured in those days. Helen Hayes and Catherine Cornell and Brian Ahern and just everybody toured. George Weiss, they all toured.
I learned this from Carol Channing, from Mary Martin, and Carol learned it from Lon Fontanne. Touring. She said, go out on the road. It's important to go on the road, because then when those people come to New York, they'll say, oh, let's go see Carol Channing because she came to see us.
Lenny said, I could hear her voice in my ear. She said, it's your duty to the theater to tour the provinces. If your show is enough of a hit, and then you can afford to take it to the provinces.
The Luntz would take a play out with the playwright and tour for months and months and months before they would bring it into New York. And then after the run in New York, they probably would take it out and tour, you know, other places where they hadn't been.
Ethelman was doing Annie Get Your Gun, and Mary Martin took it on the road. I saw it in Dallas, Texas with Mary Martin. They all toured.
We lived out of a trunk. We never unpacked. There was no need to unpack. Boom, 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 boom. I used to say the leaping Landaus like we were a circus act.
I did a lot of it. I was, as I say, I was on the road about 20 weeks out of the year for about 20 years. There aren't the dinner theaters that used to be. There are not that many places to go to play. And also, so much of the material has been used. People are tired of seeing the same old things.
Nobody goes on the road much now. Julie Harris is the exception. Julie Harris, she lives and breathes theater, and she just wants to act, and she's brilliant, and she's the big star left that really does that.
When the great stars of the theater, when they had a success in New York, they took it on tour. You didn't see a substitute for them. You saw the actor or the actress who had made the show a success. It was thrilling.
You all have to realize that theater survives not just in New York. That is not the answer. Theater must be all over the country. If you grow up with it, you have a relationship to it that you never want to lose. Then New York will survive. New York won't have a problem because when people come to New York, they know what they want to do.
Those were the best days. I could go off with my husband, and they had so many summer theaters, and that was your summer. You know, you do a week each place. But you know how you do have an epiphany sometime. I was putting on my makeup backstage, doing Summer Smoke, Alma, my character Alma. And I was putting on my makeup, and I thought, oh, how lucky can you get? This is the best of all worlds. Being in that play, in that theater, loving the role, terrific director, my kids, going all summer. That was the best of all worlds.
It was a matter of 5 minutes. You were about to leave for Europe to look for Lancelot for Camelot.
We thought we'd seen everyone on this side of the ocean.
5 minutes before we left the office, an agent called and pleaded with us to listen to Barbie.
Saturday afternoon, there were several messages there from a guy called Abe Newborn from New York. And he said, can you come to New York to audition for Learn and Know for the next musical? Monday morning, I went over to New York, lost my luggage at the airport. I was in blue jeans and cowboy boots and a T-shirt and a leather jacket that had needed cleaning. I was sitting on the steps inside the theater, and Moss looked at me and he said, well, I see you've come prepared for action. And I said, yeah. But they went and sat in the audience and they said, okay. Robert Goulet. And I sang a song.
In springtime, summer, winter, fall.
And let it all fly and let it all hang out. And at the end of it, they got up and they came back on stage, and they went to stage left, and I'm over here in stage right, watching them, and having a little discussion in there. And I went over by the piano, and this Bud Whitney came over, and he put his arm around me. Now, I don't even know this guy, but I figured this is theater. And he said, $750 a week for the first 9 months, $900 a week for the next 9 months, and $1,000 a week for the last 6 months. And I said, I'll do it for nothing. He said, shut up. Because he needed a lot of money for that one phone call. First day of rehearsals, we sat down in all these chairs. And Julie was there, Richard was there. Now, we read the script cold. None of us had ever seen the script. And nobody talked to me. None of the people who were producing, none of the leads, none of the chorus kids. No one talked to me. I was over there by myself and said, so this is Broadway. Okay.
What am I doing here? What am I doing here on the same stage with actor Richard Burton, one of the greatest actors in the whole world? I mean, he was Hamlet at the age of 23. Sure, they say, come on down from Canada. It's a big break. It'll help launch your career. Well, it's not going to launch it. I'm afraid it's going to sink it. I mean, when that Shakespearean character starts devouring up the scenery, he's going to chew me up with it.
No, Moss said, all right, let's read it again. Read it again meant to me, this time we've got to put something into it. God forgive me, but I do. Overacting or something. And I saw Richard drop his massive head in his hands and say, oh, God. And I figured, I'm going to take the next plane to Toronto this afternoon. So I sang C'est moi, and if ever I'd leave you right then and there. And they listened to me sing, and Richard said, he's got the voice of an angel.
You hear that voice? You hear that beautiful baritone voice? What am I doing on the same stage as him? I'm an actor, not a choir boy. I must be out of my mind.
So I kept my job.
No, never could I leave you at all.
See, I worked at the Blue Dragon nightclub there down by Stockyards, and he come there with the annual rodeo. Him and the rest of them cowboys in that nightclub every night. Every night there was a big fight.
You asked Eva Marie Saint, you asked Joanne Woodward, why did they go into the theater? Because they saw Kim Stanley.
I am being abducted.
You wanted to be like Kim. I mean, there weren't many, there was a lot of competition, but there was something about her that you could allow yourself to say, I want to be that honest. I want to be that wonderful on stage.
And before her, it was Laurette Taylor. But these are the people of a magnitude that I've never seen acting like that. Never seen anything in my life like Kim Stanley.
She and Geraldine Page, I think, were the closest thing to the beauty of Laurette Taylor's acting. I mean, you could draw a line and you could put them on it.
Within 1 2-week period, I saw Geraldine Page in Sweet Bird of Youth, and I saw Kim Stanley in A Far Country. I mean, that was so beyond anything my meager mind could grasp because of what was going on up there.
Saw Kim Stanley and Cherie once, and I went the next day because I couldn't believe it. I thought, I must have just seen something that just happened once.
She did one of the most wonderful, adorable, funny performances ever in Bus Stop.
Someplace I can hide. What? There's a man on that bus. I want to hide.
Well, gee, honey, I don't know. You could...
Listen, I'll hide in the powder room. If a tall, lanky cowboy comes in here, you tell him I disappeared.
Hey, you can't go out there. It's cold. You'll freeze your ass. Well, sure it's outside, honey. This is just a country town.
And I think Marilyn tried to copy a lot of what she did, and some of it she copied pretty well.
He's got a ranch in Montana. He said we're going to get married just the minute we get there.
And you're against it?
I don't want to go to some godforsaken ranch in Montana. For the 100th time, my name ain't Cherry.
Well, I can't say it the way you do. What's wrong with Cherry?
It's kind of embarrassing. Yeah, pay attention. I ain't going with you, and that is final.
But, Cherry, we was familiar with each other.
That don't mean you gotta marry me.
You know, after a long run in a show, you kind of get, oh, my God, 2 today, you know, Wednesday. Oy, so 2. I never got tired of watching Kim Stanley. Never. Never. She was wonderful.
When I was 17, 18, I played a little bit part in Trip to Bountiful with Kim Stanley and Lillian Gish. I watched Kim every night, watched her every night. It was so startling, some of the things that she did, nobody had ever done before. I'd never seen acting like that, you know, just totally mind-blowing.
Have you ever seen The Goddess?
Sure, she played the Monroe role.
Well, you watch that movie again and watch it carefully, scene by scene, and you will not believe the stuff she does as an actress in that. And that's film, which she hated.
And this is the face of Kim Stanley, probably the greatest actress of our time.
Hired as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God is with man, and he will dwell."
That's the greatest performance that has ever been captured on film. I've never seen a performance like that.
I could go back now, I would ask to go to the theater where Kim Stanley is playing in A Far Country, so I could see her say, "I can't move my legs." I would go to the theater where Kim Stanley was playing in Cherie, where I would watch her take a string of pearls and put them around Horst Buckholz's neck and say, "This is going to be the last great moment of my life." I would want to see Kim Stanley open her eyes at the beginning of Natural Affection, sit up, look out, and communicate to me that she was living a life of incredible despair without ever having said a word. I would want to go and see her and the Three Sisters say, I love Verschienen.
I love that man. I love Verschieden. Stop it. But anyway, I don't hear you. Well, what am I to do? At first I thought him foolish and strange, and then I fell in love.
Light is a thing in the universe that you can only burn so bright without burning out. There was a soul and a genius there with a kind of wattage. It couldn't burn. You can't burn that way. And that doesn't last. It was so extraordinary.
The only time dancing was truly fulfilling was in shows that Bob Fosse was the director and choreographer, and he very much believed in, you've got to act to dance.
Gwen would sing a song from Damn Yankees, Whatever Lola Wants, and this is the way she shows up, knowing the lyrics at least.
And that's all.
And sings for me the first time.
Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. And little man.
And you would think one dialogue and say another. That was Bob's trick. And sometimes you'd rehearse the scene with that other dialogue. And then you would go in and do the scene, and you would act the other dialogue while saying what was written.
Now, this you would have to imagine is the locker room of the Washington Senators. Gwen is the devil's helper, Lola, and I'm going to try and help out and be Joe Hardy, the phenomenal baseball player. Joe Hardy wants to go home, and Lola doesn't want to let him get home.
But he knew what the scene required, so he would give you an image.
And your heart and soul is what I came for.
Now, Bob's images were very different. But,
what were his images?
Being a little fat girl. A little flirty fat girl.
I'm irresistible, you fool. Give in.
Lola was funny to the audience. But when you stop and think that she sold her soul to be that person, and then be given the image of a little fat girl.
Hello, Joe. It's me. He hit so far. Hold on. That's you. Uh-huh.
So when people say it's sexy, to me it was never sexy. It was just a little fat girl.
I always get what I aim for, and your heart and soul is what I came for.
I mean, it's layer upon layer. He always said, life is an onion. You can keep peeling and peeling and peeling and peeling. He said, that's what I want you to do as an actor, as a dancer, till you get to the very kernel of what it's about. And Bob was fabulous at that.
We did one backers audition for West Side Story. It was a disaster, and it was in a very fancy apartment overlooking the East River, and Lenny hated having to go hat in hand. He thought it was beneath his dignity.
Arthur, Jerry, Lenny, and Steve were there. And Lenny pounded the piano singing the song, so loud that you could barely believe it, because he was nervous.
The whole atmosphere was not fun. And the backers didn't get it at all. Not 1 cent was raised.
I'd spent the previous year listening to those songs, and I thought they were pretty odd. Steve would come over and say, listen to this fabulous melody. And he'd sit down at the piano and play Maria. And I remember saying, that's so ugly. I didn't get it. I mean, stupid.
I totally got it.
I got it. I knew that I had one foot in the door of something really amazing, and that I would feel, standing in the back of the theater, a part of the history of musicals.
When I heard America for the first time, I went, how does he know these rhythms like this? I mean, this is just so basic and so fabulous. But Jerry, I believe, went up to Spanish Harlem, and checked it all out up there. I mean, there was a lot of work done.
West Side Story was an enormously unusual show.
I know that West Side was a unique situation, and we were dealing with geniuses that would settle for nothing less than a 200% effort on everybody's part. But Jerry literally asked us as actors, the principals, to rehearse for a full month with no pay at all. And we worked in a little attic somewhere.
We didn't know that that was going to be such an amazing piece of theater. We had no idea because we were busy being it.
I've worked on a few shows in my life where I thought, this rhythm, this sound, the way this is happening, this is unique and getting me in some visceral place where I'm so excited I could scream.
And the first time you know something is when you do like a run-through for gypsies or something, you know, and you go, oh my goodness, oh wow.
At least 6 million people saw opening night of West Side, because every time I meet them, they say, oh, we were there opening night, and you know they weren't. You know they couldn't have been there.
It was one of the most wonderful nights in the theater. You lived or you died in one night.
I went to the opening night of West Side Story with Steve Sondheim, which was not a very happy experience for him. The reviews were very disappointing for Steve. It was as though the lyric writer didn't exist.
Now, it was the Times ignore me, the Trib, Walter Kerr slammed me.
The reviews were condescending. They were good, but begrudging.
They had come in ready to have that be their opinion until they got hooked in the middle of the first act.
What does Tony stand for?
Anton.
Te adoro, Anton.
Te adoro, Maria.
Good night.
Good night. Sleep well, and when you dream, dream of me.
And then they came along for the roller coaster ride, and it was undeniable. I mean, people were sobbing and screaming, and yeah, it was thrilling opening night.
Though the post-war nightclub boom will hardly last forever, the U.S. nightclub as an institution appears to be here to stay.
I did go to Juilliard, I did study opera, but it interfered with my nightclubbing. I was very young, and I loved to go dancing at the Stork Club, so I would get up at 8 in the morning and go to school, and then come and do my play at night, and go out dancing till the Stork Club closed.
We went there every night, every single night.
I used to go to the El Morocco a lot. I had a lot of dates. It was such a wonderful time in New York.
Oh, it was heavenly. It was just heavenly. I mean, all the people that were playing at the Blue Angel and playing at the Little Club and playing downtown in El Morocco, Cafe Society. It was just like being on a cloud.
Saturday night, we would go to 42nd Street after a show, working off Broadway in Three Penny Opera, making $45 a week. We'd go on the subway, 15 cents, come out, have a hamburger, hot dog, a beer or something, fried clam sandwich on the corner at Grant's or Hector's, go to a double feature, come out at 4 in the morning and wait for the fresh donuts to come out, the warm donuts in from the bakery at 5:30. The whole evening cost about $2. Unbelievable. $2.
When I was in the middle of the night, Bob Fosse lent my late husband, John Cassavetes, his studio across from the theater. So when I was finished with the play, he'd just drop over, pick me up, and we'd go right down to 42nd Street to one theater and see 2 movies, and then we'd go across the street and see a couple more, and we'd get home, 10 o'clock in the morning sometimes. It was just, it was terrific.
Vincent Gardini and I would be acting on the stage, and he would say under his breath, "You want to go for Chinese?" We would make the plans during the play. But we did that a lot. Bobby Morse used to do that, too. I'll meet you later at Downey's.
And I think I did my happiest drinking in those days at Jim Downey's, and everybody had fun. There was Peter Falk in one booth, and everyone was at a place called Jim Downey's.
Bobby Morse was there. Oh, yes, there were reams of us. Now, we would walk by Sardi's
And we'd say, we'll be there. We'll be on the walls. But for the meantime, we'll be at Downey's.
I was leaving the Morosco Theater, and there's Kim Stanley, who I knew. And Kim introduced me to Elaine Stritch. And they said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Downey's. You want to come along, have a drink?
And my first date with Ben Gazzara in Downey's.
And could Elaine Stritch drink? They gave me a lesson and a half in how much booze one can consume.
That's right. It must have done something right for us, because it was 2 years when we both decided that it wasn't a thing to do. So Downey's was the takeoff.
You saw Gwen Verdon, Ben Gazzara, Janice Rule, Kim Stanley, Paul Newman, Maureen Stapleton, Jason Robards, Julie Harris.
There was the main room where the people who happened to be working were usually sitting, and then there was a room aside that were for other folks.
The real working actors were all in the booths. The first time I went to Downey's and got a booth, I thought I had arrived in New York.
Sardi's and all. And oh, it was such fun, you know, and I loved it. Oh, wow. It was very good.
Opening night, always in the 40s and 50s, you went to Sardi's. I mean, that was where you went, and then you waited for your newspaper reviews to come out.
After the opening of Cyrano, we went to Sardi's, and it was very exciting.
You could tell how successful the show was by how many people left Sardi's or how soon they left Sardi's.
I mean, our reviews were good, but I can imagine some of them whose reviews weren't very good, they would go home without dinner.
We all went to Sardi's. That was the great Mecca.
Walk into Sardi's every night was filled with all of the stars. Sardi's was really a theater restaurant for us. And the people that would be the outsiders would be sitting there going, oh, look, there's so-and-so, and there's so-and-so. And you, yourself, as an actor, would be going, oh, my God, there's somebody over there in the corner.
What did it feel like to walk in there while you were in a hit show?
Oh, the people would applaud. They would, they'd whisper. You'd feel it and hear it.
I've gone to Sardi's since 1947. So that's 53 years. And I can truly say that was camaraderie. That was a family, the Broadway family.
It was magical, and in Sardi's, everybody knew everybody else. It was like a club, sitting there with Bernie Hart and Moss Hart and Kitty Carlisle and all these luminaries of Broadway.
When I went back last week, it was almost embarrassing to tell the people I was going to be with that they won't know who I am anymore because I'm gone 20 years. But would you tell them who I was? Because I can't go in and not get the best table. And they did, and I did.
The opening night of Canada Hot Tin Roof, seated in front, opening night, is Tennessee Williams, Kazan, Lee Strasberg, Cheryl Crawford, and I don't know whom. I was so nervous. I said, Jesus, I better be good. Well, we blew them away. We got such a reaction. There was a big, fancy party, the fanciest thing I've ever been invited to. And at my table, Tennessee's here, Kazan is here. I'll never forget the newspapers came. The New York Times appeared. And Kazan opened it up. And what a review. What a review.
I'm not giving you any excuse to divorce me for being unfaithful or anything else.
Maggie, I wouldn't divorce you for being unfaithful or anything else. Don't you know that? Why, hell, I'd be so relieved to know you found yourself a lover.
Well, I'm taking no chances. No. I'd rather stay on this hot tin roof.
Maggie, a hot tin roof's an uncomfortable place to stay on.
Yeah. But I can stay on it just as long as I have to.
You could leave me, Maggie.
There's no reason why we can't have a child whenever we want one. Are you listening? Are you listening to me?
Yes, I hear you, Maggie. But how in hell on earth do you expect to have a child by a man that can't stand you?
What a review we all got. Jesus Christ. God, what Butch Atkinson said about me, you couldn't buy it. Burl Ives cried. He had tears in his eyes. So did Barbara Bel Geddes. I think we all cried. Jesus Christ.
If I could have lived in any time as an artist, I probably would have lived probably the 40s and the 50s, the late 40s. Brando, Streetcar, where I was starting off as an actor, in the 1940s.
Look, I'd read all about, as much as you could in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, about the Actors Studio and Marlon Brando, otherwise known as God in my racket. Well, people talk about the epiphany moment in their lives. That was mine. Whatever that was, whatever was going on there, I wanted a piece of.
Well, Marlon was a buddy. When Janice and I had our apartment on 52nd Street. But he hung out there, and eventually he got an apartment in the same brownstone. He lived underneath us.
Maureen gathered friends. She was like the queen bee. Marlon was there often. She and Marlon were very close friends.
He was wondrous on stage. He was magic. Besides being so attractive, and all the other stuff. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Marlon was whipping around New York in a motorcycle, and he was an imp.
Marlon? Oh, God. Marlon is a work of art. I think he's a work of art. He had that instinct for finding what was real in the situation and allowing himself to be vulnerable.
When I noticed Marlon was in I Remember Mama, and it wasn't a very big part, but it was a great actor speaking. An ordinary line, but it was so real.
A play called Truck Line Cafe was Marlon Brando. I thought another guy they pulled off the street. I said, who the hell is this guy? He's too good to be an actor.
In Truck Line Cafe, Marlon and I had two of the smallest parts in the whole damn play. He stopped the show. He literally stopped the show. The three leads who were sitting at the counter up there didn't know what to do. They were clapping and stomping and screaming and clapping and everything. And Marlon makes an exit. It's never happened before to me. And I don't think it's ever happened after that. And this happened every night.
I just know working with him was absolutely wonderful. I became well aware of how good an actor he was, as is.
Florence! Listen, baby, when we first met you and me, you thought I was common. Well, how right you was. I was common as dirt.
He was just incredible to work with, a sense of truth in what he was doing and what he was saying and all of that. It was to embrace. It was just marvelous to work with.
You're in an air-conditioned theater. I mean, it wasn't hot. But when you watched that play, there was sweat dripping from armpits and wet and sensual and sexual and muggy and humid. And I was dripping wet. I mean, I could smell the perspiration. I could smell the armpits. I mean, Marlon was brilliant.
As a matter of fact, there wasn't no wire at all. And there isn't no millionaire. And Miss Sting come back with roses because I know where he is. There's not a darn thing but imagination and lies and conceit and tricks. And look at yourself. Look at yourself in a sworn-out Mardi Gras outfit rented for 50 cents to some rag picker.
Please.
I've been on to you from the start, and not once did you pull the wool over this boy's eyes. You come in here and you sprinkle the place with powder and spray perfume. You stick a paper lantern over the light bulb. And lo and behold, the place is turned into Egypt, and you're the queen of the Nile, sitting on your throne, swilling down my lick. And you know what I say? Ha ha! Did you hear what I says? And ha ha ha! Come to think of it, maybe you wouldn't be bad to interfere with.
Stay back. Don't you come toward me another step,
You're gonna what?
Something awful will happen. It will.
What kind of act are you putting on now?
Don't. I'm in danger.
You want some roughhouse, son? All right, let's have a little roughhouse. Drop that bottle top, you tiger. Drop it. We've had this state with each other from the beginning.
When you work with that kind of truth, it brings out the absolute best in you. It really does. It was just extraordinary working with him. Marlon can make wrong choices, even bad choices as far as that's concerned. But the one thing he can never be is false. And believe me, that sense of truth, that absolute truth is glorious to work with. Believe me.
I'd say Marlon broke the mold. He shattered a transitional period in American theater. His craft, his skill, his talent was unbelievable. Believable. Believably unbelievable.
Every breathing, singing, dancing lady wanted the part, and everybody auditioned for Mame. And nobody just hit us in the heart.
This was the one part that I desperately wanted. I really went after it, and I'm not known for doing that, but in this instance I did.
She kept calling Jerry. She was determined. That's what I love about Angela. She was determined to get that job. She wasn't about to let up.
I knew that the producers didn't feel I had a big enough, strong enough name to carry a show.
One of the producers looked at me and said, "Are you kidding? This is a lady who plays everybody's mother." They really weren't very interested.
That's a big, big, big role. Nobody knew if she could really cut it, you know.
And Angela came to my apartment, and I opened the door, and I just knew that that was my Mame, and we went into cahoots together.
He volunteered to help me and taught me every single song.
We rehearsed and rehearsed. We went out to dinner. We came back and rehearsed again. And we met the next day at the Winter Garden. And when they said, "Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Angela Lansbury," she walked out on bare stage.
It was in a darkened theater with just one little kind of work light and a stage manager who was asked to hold the light over my face while I was singing.
I snuck into the orchestra pit.
And he actually played for me. Now, that was unheard of. You see, you didn't do that. So he did it secretly.
I did an arpeggio, and she went, "Light the candles,"
and all this much, going crazy, trying to give a performance, you know.
I tell you, if the 5 people I was sitting with didn't fall out of their seats, they almost did.
And she just knocked them for a loop. She sang "It's Today" and "If He Walked Into My Life," and that was me. It was never, the search was over.
And it worked. It really worked. I never did anything before it, and I've never done anything since that came anywhere close to Mame.
Within a few short years, Hair, O Calcutta, and Jesus Christ Superstar had opened. The world was changing, and so was the theater. But this Broadway that had created Rodgers and Hammerstein, Irving Berlin, Ethel Merman, Brando, Sondheim, Laurette Taylor, Mame, and Tennessee Williams, what happened to it?
I had an appointment with Richard Rodgers the day after Hair opened. He said, "I think my kind of music is over." He said, look at the reviews this got. And he said, "It's rock and roll now." And I said, "No, what are you talking? Your kind of music will never be over." You know, but it was.
I always felt that the demise of the big musical was when all the little group shows were there. There were no choruses.
There used to be singing choruses, and usually 10 and 10, and dancing choruses, usually 8 and 8. And because of West Side Story, I think they realized, well, dancers sing good enough, so now we don't have to hire all those singers.
They would get somebody who could dance a little, could sing a little, and act a little.
Remember when the talkies came in and all the Hollywood stars, they had to learn to talk? Well, the dancers had to learn to sing. We had to learn to sing.
In the 19th century in Italy, everybody was writing operas, wonderful operas. In America, we had the American theater, which is the only thing we invented in this country except jazz. And it's gone.
Acting was different, and our attitude about art was different. Our attitude as a society toward culture itself was different. The whole thing was just more lush.
Well, plays became increasingly fewer and fewer. There wasn't a chance to make a living.
The 70s, things begin to kind of ramp down, and by the 80s, it's pretty much concretized what we have today.
When I did Pirates of Penzance in 1982, it was a joke. Every night it sounded like Nurse Ratched. This one will be out, that one will be out, this one will be out. Someone's breaking in a new pair of shoes. They're not coming in tonight. I mean, I never saw anything like that.
Before I was a singing teacher, I was on Broadway, and I was in Carnival, and I happened to be Kay Ballard's understudy, and she never was out, never. Those were the troopers in those days.
It's a whole other kind of show business I don't understand.
I used to do 3 flops a season. At the time, I thought, oh, please, why can't I be in a big hit? But those failures were enormously instructive. For young actors today, where did they go to get experience in the field?
When I went back to do Beauty and the Beast, I said, you know what? This is a whole different Broadway. This is a whole different theater. There were no special effects. We didn't use microphones. We had voices that we used.
There were no mics in the 50s to speak of. Most beautiful voice in American theater, Ben Gazzara. And he could stand and whisper or talk just like this, and he could fill a room. Well, 2000, he didn't have to do anything.
I remember, quite frankly, being able to whisper and be heard in the Morosco Theater up to the top. Yeah.
Now, miking in the theater not only changes the theater, but it kind of destroys it. It's not the same experience. It's not live. Live is unmiked.
All right, I'm going to be blatant now. When a musical wins Best Musical, when a show wins Best Musical, and it has no words in it, it has canned music, I don't believe anybody sings. When that wins Best Musical, something is different, very different.
And sound is probably even more high-tech today in what they can do. They just preset everything, and they just push a button, and it all happens. And that wasn't true. We had to really do it all ourselves. Certainly the music had to be done live. We were live. Today in the theater, a lot of stuff is on pre-record. I mean, I know it's done because I know of recording studios where they do it.
You need to walk into the theater and hear that orchestra strike up that band and see that curtain. The theater is live, live. And when you start putting canned stuff in there, it's not live anymore.
It was in 1966. Angela and I came out in a show that had no chandeliers and no Cadillacs on stage and no helicopters, and we both ran away with the Tonys.
But I don't feel like we should take up the space of a Broadway theater with a revival. We need to have that space available and encourage the new things to grow so there'll be something to revive 20 years from now.
I think people are so stupid when they say we shouldn't revive these musicals, revive it. My God, there's a whole new generation in the world. They should see Kiss Me, Kate. It's great theater. They should see Guys and Dolls, one of the best musicals ever written. They should see Annie Get Your Gun. It's a ball. This is, Beethoven, this is Bach, this is something, for Christ's sake.
Going to the theater is no longer just something you do. It's an event. For most people, you plan it, often a year in advance. You get tickets for whatever the big hit is, whatever is difficult to get tickets for. That's what you go to.
Tickets are $100 a piece. If you take your wife, you've spent $200. God forbid you should have 2 kids who want to go to the theater. You've spent $400 to go to the theater. A hamburger is $25 now. It's not 75 cents like it was in those days. You've spent $500 to have a bad night in the theater, if it's a bad show.
People pay far too much money to sit in an uncomfortable chair where they cannot smoke, drink, eat, scratch, cop a feel, or put their knees on the chair in front of them, to not see something that's going to challenge them. You may do anything to an audience, but you may not bore them.
But most shows get standing ovations because the audience wants to remind themselves that they're at a unique experience, particularly since they paid $100 a ticket and not to mention the babysitter. So so the only way to make the evening their evening is to stand and ovate. It's their part. They're saying, I am part of this evening.
Once they added the tax and raised the prices for whatever it was that happened in New York at that time, once you do that, you can never go back. And they should have, because they're too high.
In 1949, it cost more to see a first-run movie on Times Square. It was $2 to see a movie, but it was only 85 cents to see a Broadway play. And the souvenir programs were a quarter. The theater wasn't a luxury. It was as natural to life to a New Yorker as breathing.
And so, year after year, the fabulous invalid, always ailing and never dying, continues to work the old sleight of hand, the well-loved magic, which for thousands of years has wrought its enchantment.
It's the famous line of George S. Kaufman. The theater is a fabulous invalid. There was a time a couple years ago when I kid you not, it was in intensive care, big time, and it's coming out of it. I remember several years ago reading the list of the plays in the Times like this, and now it's like this. Broadway's in great shape.
But I hope that as more people realize that you actually have to nourish the soul, finally, as happened in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, the human spirit has a survival instinct just the same as the human body, and finally it will want nourishment.
I have a feeling that Broadway's like an old hooker. She just goes on and puts out, and people still, her clientele is not what it once was. They don't line up like they used to, but there's still people that go, oh, wow, I'd like to see some of that.
But nothing can replace Chita Rivera or Angela Lansbury or Marlon Brando or Kim Stanley. You're a living, breathing thing, an actor, and you are irreplaceable.
Kids are still coming from Ohio, from Indiana, even California, from Connecticut. They're still coming with that dream of going on Broadway.
There's never been anything like it since, and there will never, ever be again. And it was a time that we all remember lovingly, and it's all different now. So, thank goodness I was in there.
So, did I find what I was looking for? Was it a golden age? Did I learn anything? Well, I did find out that it was a time when Broadway affected the world. When you could walk within a few blocks and choose from new shows by Eugene O'Neill, Cole Porter, Arthur Miller, or Lerner and Loewe. You could see Gwen Verdon or Helen Hayes, Marlon Brando or Yul Brynner, Shakespeare or Damn Yankees. And everyone could afford it. Hollywood came to Broadway looking for product, not the other way around. Is it a golden age now? That's not for me to say. There's some young kid in Beech Grove, Indiana, or some small town, sitting in front of a computer downloading songs over the internet from Hairspray or the producers. And that's his movie to make in 20 years.
There's no people like show people. We smile when we're alone. Yesterday they told you you would not go far. That night you opened, and there you are. Next day on your dressing room, they've hung a star. Let's go with the show.
And to think a few hours ago, we didn't even know each other's names. And yet you trusted me like a friend. You've permitted me to do things for you, and you've told me all about yourselves. More than I think you know.
I'm a-going back home and give my thanks to the one who done me wrong. The one who done me wrong. She do a bump. He done her wrong, and she enjoyed that bump every second of it. She enjoyed it. Done me wrong, boom. And she... You know that character's funny.
Broadway rhythm, it's got me. Everybody dance.
When I marry Mr. Snow.
What a day, what a day. And Julie would come in. The flowers will be buzzing with a hum of bees. Birds will make a racket in the churchyard trees. For I love Mr. Snow.
I got a story.
A story for
you, baby.
There's no business like show business like no business I know.
The borscht is bubbling over. Hold on to your hats. Here comes that little Marvick presenting Mickey Cats.
If ever I would leave you, it wouldn't be in Sardi's. Seeing you in Sardi's, I never would go. Something like that, I don't know. Why did I say Sardi's?
I don't know.
I could have said a few other things.
Other girls act coy and hard to catch, but other girls ain't having any fun. Every time I lose a wrestling match, I get a funny feeling that I won.
Something sweet, something sort of grandish sweeps my soul. When thou art near, my heart feels so sugar candish. My head feels so ginger beer.
If I loved you time and again, oh, I keep going, then how I loved you. If I would swallow like that, so I could, and the people said, my God, how good actor he is. You know, shows this emotion. I said, emotion, hell, I'm just swallowing so I can sing the next two notes, you know.
Who are you now? Are you someone better?
It's a lazy afternoon.
You could spray her wherever your finger the streptococcus lurk. You could give her a shot for whatever she's got, but it just won't work. If she's tired of getting the fisheye from the hotel clerk, a person could develop a cold. Oh, I would kill to have written that.
This is a Rosemary, I love you.
I'm always thinking of you. Yeah.
And the Indian love call, when I'm calling you.
Now at home, I'm bringing up a sextet 5. I got the other one I'll get yet.
Need to relax, need to escape. Go see Fay Ray in the palm of an ape.
When the Broadway baby says goodnight, it's early in the morning.
Dun 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 dun.
How I miss the old soft shoe. How I miss you know who. A stare.
The way you wear your hat, the way you sip your tea, the memory of all that. No, they can't take that away from me. No, they can't take that away from me.
The music has stopped, and the children must go now. Have I stayed too long at the fair?
Deep in December, it's nice to remember the fire of September that made us mellow. Deep in December, our hearts should remember and follow. And that's always the end of the evening for me.
Now, last question.
The more you know, the less you know.
Well, you would know.
And I would know. I think that's a good quote anyway.
I might have just gotten the end of my film.
Yes, I have a feeling.
But does anyone still wear a hat?
Oh my God, you're unbelievable.
That's funny because
You're wearing a hat.
Rick, that's enough, isn't it? You got enough, for Christ's sake.
Let's go on with the show.